My name is Isabel Wright. I'm 36 years old, and after spending 8 years building a portfolio of digital marketing agencies and online consulting businesses that now generate over $100,000 monthly through managing social media campaigns, creating digital content strategies, and providing marketing automation services for mid-sized companies across North America, while maintaining a modest lifestyle focused on financial freedom and early retirement rather than conspicuous consumption and material displays of wealth, I sat through a devastating family dinner where my sister Kristen loudly declared, "You're too cheap, Isabel. Just stay home," before announcing that I was being deliberately excluded from the family's upcoming luxury vacation to the French Riviera because we don't want someone who pinches pennies and complains about prices ruining our high-end experience. What my family didn't understand as they laughed at my supposedly limited means and planned their luxury trip was that my actual monthly income exceeded their combined annual salaries, that I could afford to purchase their entire vacation 10 times over without affecting my savings rate, and that their economy flights and mid-range hotel would look embarrassingly modest compared to the private jet and penthouse suite I was about to book for the same destination. The digital marketing empire that my family dismissed as a small website business had begun during my late 20s, when I recognized that traditional corporate careers offered limited income potential compared to building scalable online businesses that could generate revenue while I slept, creating the kind of financial freedom that allowed me to control my time and build wealth without trading hours for dollars in conventional employment structures. Digital marketing is the future of business growth, I had explained to early clients when building my first agency. Companies need sophisticated online presence and strategic social media management to reach modern consumers. I'm offering comprehensive digital strategy that combines content creation, audience targeting, and conversion optimization to help businesses grow their revenue through online channels that traditional advertising can't effectively reach. The value proposition that emphasized measurable results and return on investment had resonated with business owners who understood that effective digital marketing could dramatically increase their customer acquisition while reducing their advertising costs, compared to traditional media buying and conventional promotional strategies that were becoming increasingly ineffective for reaching younger consumers. Isabel's campaigns increased our online sales by 340% in 6 months. One of my early clients had written in a testimonial that helped attract additional business. Her understanding of social media algorithms and consumer behavior transformed our digital presence from amateur to professional. The revenue generated from her marketing strategies paid for her services within the first month, and everything after that has been pure profit growth. The success stories from satisfied clients had created steady referral business that allowed me to raise my rates while simultaneously scaling my operations by hiring contractors and building systems that automated routine tasks, creating the kind of leveraged income where my earnings weren't directly limited by the hours I personally worked each week. Your business model is brilliant, other entrepreneurs would observe when learning about my digital marketing operations. You've created recurring revenue streams through retainer clients while also offering one-time project services that generate immediate cash flow. You're not trading time for money. You're building systems that generate income whether you're actively working or traveling. The recognition of my business structure's sophistication was both professionally validating and financially rewarding. But it was also information that I deliberately didn't share with my family, who had consistently demonstrated that they measured success through visible consumption, rather than understanding actual wealth accumulation or appreciating financial independence that came from building profitable businesses. Isabel works from home doing something with websites, my mother Linda would explain to relatives when they asked about my career. It's nice that she can set her own schedule, but Kristen has a real corporate position with a Fortune 500 company. Kristen's career is much more impressive and stable than Isabel's freelance internet work. The characterization of my 6-figure monthly income as freelance internet work, while praising Kristen's corporate salary that I knew was approximately $75,000 annually, had been typical of how my parents evaluated career success based on job titles and company names, rather than understanding actual income levels, or recognizing that entrepreneurship could be more profitable than conventional employment. Kristen just got promoted to senior marketing coordinator, Gregory would add when comparing his daughter's careers. She's really climbing the corporate ladder and establishing herself in the business world. She drives a luxury car and wears designer clothes to work. That's the kind of professional success that makes parents proud. The emphasis on Kristen's visible markers of success, the leased luxury vehicle, the designer wardrobe purchased on credit, the corporate title that sounded impressive to people who didn't understand that coordinator was actually a mid-level position, had revealed how thoroughly my parents equated material displays with actual financial achievement. But what my family never understood was that Kristen's impressive lifestyle was almost entirely financed through debt, with credit card balances, car payments, and shopping habits that consumed nearly her entire paycheck, while I was saving and investing over 60% of my substantial income, building wealth that would provide genuine financial security, rather than maintaining appearances that impressed observers without creating actual prosperity. "I need to borrow some money until my next paycheck," Kristen would occasionally request when her spending exceeded her income. "Just $500 to cover some expenses. I'll pay you back when I get paid." The requests for short-term loans from someone who earned a professional salary while I supposedly ran a small website business had been revealing about the gap between Kristen's visible lifestyle and her actual financial stability, though I had always provided the loans knowing they would never be repaid, because discussing money directly would have forced confrontation with the reality that my supposedly inferior career was actually far more profitable than her impressive corporate position. "Isabel can afford to lend money because she doesn't have any expenses," Linda would observe when Kristen mentioned these transactions. "She lives so cheaply that she probably has savings just sitting around. It's generous of her to help Kristen, who has so many professional obligations and appearance standards to maintain for her corporate career." The assumption that my ability to lend money came from living cheaply, rather than from earning substantial income, had been another example of how my family interpreted my modest lifestyle as evidence of limited means, rather than recognizing it as conscious choice to prioritize financial independence over conspicuous consumption. Have you ever built significant wealth while being dismissed by family members who measured success through material displays rather than understanding actual income or appreciating financial wisdom? That's exactly what I experienced as my parents praised Kristen's debt-financed lifestyle while treating my genuine prosperity as evidence that I was struggling and needed to be more ambitious about my career. The family dynamics that would make my exclusion from the French Riviera trip possible had been developing for years through consistent patterns where my modest lifestyle was interpreted as financial limitation rather than strategic choice, while Kristen's expensive habits were celebrated as evidence of success, despite creating the kind of financial stress that would eventually limit her actual life options. "Isabel, you should invest in a professional wardrobe," Patricia would advise when observing my casual work-from-home attire. "First impressions matter in business, and you're not going to attract high-paying clients if you're always wearing jeans and t-shirts. Look at Kristen. She understands that success requires looking successful." The suggestion that I needed to look successful to attract clients ignored the reality that my digital marketing work was conducted entirely online, where clients never saw my physical appearance and judged my value based on campaign results and revenue growth rather than on my wardrobe choices during video calls where business casual was perfectly appropriate. "I don't need designer clothes for my work," I would reply while declining to explain that my relaxed dress code was a conscious choice enabled by my business model, rather than evidence that I couldn't afford professional attire. "My clients care about results, not about what I'm wearing during strategy meetings. That's exactly the kind of attitude that limits your growth," Gregory would respond with criticism of my supposedly unprofessional approach. Successful people understand that image matters. Kristen's corporate success is partly because she presents herself as someone who belongs in executive environments. You could learn from her example. The suggestion that I should emulate Kristen's approach ignored the massive income disparity between us. But explaining that reality would have required revealing my actual earnings and destroying the family dynamic where Kristen was the successful daughter and I was the struggling entrepreneur who needed guidance about basic professional standards. "Isabel still drives that old car," relatives would observe when commenting on my 8-year-old sedan that was fully paid off and perfectly functional. When is she going to upgrade to something more appropriate for a business owner? Kristen just leased a beautiful luxury SUV. That's the kind of vehicle that signals professional success. The focus on my vehicle as evidence of financial limitation, while praising Kristen's expensive lease payment, had been another example of how my family measured prosperity through consumption, rather than understanding that my old car represented conscious choice to avoid debt and maximize savings, rather than reflecting inability to afford newer transportation. But the most damaging pattern had been my family's treatment of my lifestyle choices as moral failings, rather than strategic decisions, creating narrative where my modest consumption made me cheap and boring, rather than recognizing it as disciplined wealth building that would provide genuine security and freedom. Isabel won't even split an expensive bottle of wine at dinner, Kristen would complain, when I declined to participate in costly restaurant indulgences. She always orders the cheapest thing on the menu and makes everyone feel guilty for enjoying nice meals. She's so cheap that it ruins the experience of going out. The characterization of my ordering moderately priced meals as making everyone feel guilty had been projection of Kristen's own financial anxiety onto my behavior, since my choosing $25 entrees rather than $60 steaks had no actual impact on anyone else's enjoyment, but apparently triggered uncomfortable awareness that their expensive selections were creating financial stress that my modest choices avoided. We should stop inviting Isabel to nice restaurants, Linda would suggest after these complaints. If she's not going to appreciate fine dining and participate in ordering premium items, maybe she'd be more comfortable at casual places that match her budget. We don't want to make her feel inadequate by going to restaurants she can't afford. The assumption that I couldn't afford expensive restaurants rather than choosing not to spend money on overpriced meals had created a self-reinforcing cycle where my family excluded me from activities they perceived as beyond my means, which I didn't correct, because explaining my actual financial position would have destroyed the comfortable narratives they had constructed about their own success relative to mine. Isabel never buys name-brand anything, Patricia would observe when comparing my shopping habits to Kristen's designer purchases. Everything is generic or discount store items. I worry that she's really struggling financially and too proud to ask for help. Maybe we should talk to her about finding a more stable career with steady income. The concern that I was struggling because I didn't waste money on premium brands had been both insulting and revealing about how thoroughly my family equated spending with prosperity, unable to conceive that someone might have substantial income, but choose not to waste it on products whose only advantage over generic alternatives was expensive marketing and brand recognition. "I'm fine, Mom," I would reply when these concerns were raised. "I'm very comfortable with my income and my lifestyle choices. I don't need brand names to be happy. That's what people say when they're trying to save face about financial problems," Gregory would respond with interpretation that confirmed his assumptions. "Isabel, there's no shame in admitting that freelance internet work doesn't pay as well as traditional employment. If you need help finding a corporate position, Kristen might have connections at her company." The offer to help me find real employment earning a fraction of my actual income had been the ultimate demonstration of how completely my family misunderstood my financial situation, but accepting this misunderstanding was easier than forcing confrontation with reality that would shatter their comfortable assessment of relative success among family members. But these patterns of misunderstanding and dismissal would reach their peak when my family began planning a luxury vacation to the French Riviera that they considered too expensive and sophisticated for someone they believed was pinching pennies and struggling with her small internet business. The planning for the French Riviera trip that would lead to my public exclusion began 6 months before the scheduled departure date, when Kristen announced at a family gathering that she was organizing a luxury vacation experience to celebrate her recent corporate promotion and wanted the whole family to join her for an unforgettable week of European sophistication. "I'm planning an amazing trip to the French Riviera," Kristen had announced during Sunday dinner. "We'll spend a week in Nice, with day trips to Monaco and Cannes. I found a beautiful hotel with Mediterranean views and will experience the kind of luxury lifestyle that successful people enjoy. This is going to be the trip of a lifetime." The emphasis on luxury lifestyle and successful people had been deliberate positioning of the trip as something exclusive and sophisticated, creating framework where participation would be interpreted as evidence of having achieved financial success, worthy of such experiences. That sounds wonderful. Linda had responded with immediate enthusiasm. How much will this cost? I assume it's going to be expensive, but you only live once, and this is exactly the kind of experience that makes life meaningful. I'm estimating about $6,000 per person for flights, accommodations, meals, and activities. Kristen had announced with price point that was substantial, but not extraordinary for a week-long European vacation. It's definitely an investment, but we're talking about staying in 4-star hotels, dining at good restaurants, and experiencing one of the world's most glamorous destinations. This isn't a budget trip. This is about experiencing luxury. The repeated emphasis on luxury and the characterization of $6,000 as a significant financial commitment had been creating psychological framework where the trip would be perceived as exclusive experience that only financially successful family members could comfortably afford. Gregory and I are definitely in, Patricia had confirmed immediately. We've always wanted to see the French Riviera, and this sounds like the perfect opportunity. $6,000 is a lot, but we can manage it for a once-in-a-lifetime experience. When are you thinking about going? I'm looking at September, Kristen had replied while pulling up calendar and pricing information. The weather is still beautiful, but the peak summer crowds have diminished. I'm ready to book if everyone can commit to the dates and the cost. The pressure to commit immediately, rather than allowing time for consideration, had been creating urgency around the trip planning. But I had been prepared to join what sounded like a pleasant European vacation that would be easily affordable given my actual income level. Count me in, I had said, while assuming I was included in Kristen's invitation to the whole family. September works for my schedule, and the French Riviera sounds like a beautiful destination. I'll transfer my deposit whenever you're ready to book. But the moment I expressed interest in joining the trip, the entire dynamic of the conversation had shifted. As Kristen exchanged glances with our parents that suggested I had misunderstood something fundamental about this invitation. Actually, Isabel, we need to talk about whether this trip is really right for you, Kristen had said with tone that suggested she was about to explain something uncomfortable but necessary. This is going to be a luxury experience with nice restaurants and upscale activities. We're not going to be looking for budget options or spending time searching for deals. Everyone participating needs to be comfortable with spending money and enjoying experiences without worrying about cost. The implication that I would worry about cost or seek budget options, rather than simply enjoying the vacation, had been both insulting and revealing about how Kristen perceived my modest lifestyle, as evidence that I couldn't afford to participate in experiences she considered sophisticated and expensive. I'm fine with the cost, I had replied while trying to understand why my participation was being questioned. $6,000 is reasonable for a week in the French Riviera. I'm not concerned about the pricing. It's not just about whether you can technically afford it. Linda had interjected with explanation that suggested they were concerned about more than just my ability to pay for the trip. This vacation is about experiencing luxury and enjoying nice things without constantly calculating value or looking for cheaper alternatives. Kristen wants everyone to be able to fully embrace the experience, and we're worried that your frugal tendencies would make you uncomfortable and might affect the group dynamic. Have you ever been told that your financial wisdom and conscious spending choices made you unsuitable for participating in family experiences? That's exactly what was happening as my family prepared to exclude me from their trip based on assumptions that my modest lifestyle reflected inability to afford luxury rather than deliberate choice to avoid wasteful spending. I don't have frugal tendencies, I had protested, while still not understanding the depth of their misperception about my financial situation. I spend money on things that matter to me. I just don't waste money on things that don't add value. I can absolutely enjoy a nice vacation without worrying about cost. Isabel, you order the cheapest wine on the menu, Kristen had replied with examples of my supposedly problematic behavior. You shop at discount stores. You drive an old car. You wear generic clothes. You complain when restaurants are overpriced. You're constantly talking about getting good value for your money. That's fine for your lifestyle. but it's not compatible with a luxury vacation where the whole point is experiencing premium everything without being concerned about whether it's the best deal. The catalog of my supposedly cheap behaviors, all of which were actually conscious choices to avoid wasting money on things that didn't matter, had been delivered as evidence that I was fundamentally unsuited for luxury experiences, rather than recognizing that choosing not to waste money was different from being unable to afford experiences I valued. I don't complain about prices. I had defended myself while recognizing that I had occasionally questioned whether expensive menu items were worth their premium pricing. I just don't think paying extra for a brand name or fancy presentation automatically makes something better. But I can absolutely participate in a vacation without analyzing every expense. That's exactly what we're worried about, Gregory had said while supporting the exclusion. We want this trip to be about enjoying ourselves without any negative energy from someone who's going to be uncomfortable with the spending. Isabel, you're wonderful, but your lifestyle choices suggest you'd be happier with a different type of vacation. Maybe something more budget-friendly that matches your comfort level. The characterization of my supposedly budget-conscious preferences as comfort level, rather than strategic financial choices, had been creating narrative where they were doing me a favor by excluding me from a trip I supposedly couldn't afford or appreciate properly. This isn't about money, Kristen had continued with what would become the final declaration of my exclusion. This is about compatibility of travel styles. We want to enjoy luxury without guilt or discussion about value. Honestly, Isabel, you're too cheap. Just stay home. This trip isn't for you, and we don't want someone who pinches pennies ruining our high-end experience. We need people who can appreciate luxury and are comfortable spending money on quality experiences. The direct statement that I was too cheap and should stay home because I would ruin their experience had been delivered with such casual confidence that it was clear Kristen genuinely believed she was being reasonable, rather than recognizing she was excluding family member based on completely inaccurate assumptions about financial capability. We'll plan something more suitable for you another time, Linda had added, as if this exclusion was generous accommodation of my supposed financial limitations. Maybe a domestic road trip or something that doesn't require expensive flights and European pricing. There are plenty of lovely vacation options that would be more appropriate for your budget. The assumption that I needed budget vacation options rather than understanding that I could easily afford to take all of them on a truly luxurious trip had been the final demonstration of how thoroughly my family had misunderstood my financial situation. And it had also been the moment when I decided that people who called me cheap and excluded me from trips deserved to learn what real wealth looked like. The decision to respond to my exclusion by booking genuinely luxurious travel to the same destination where my family would be taking their luxury trip had been both personally satisfying and strategically perfect for demonstrating the gap between their perception of my finances and the reality of what I could actually afford when I chose to spend money on experiences I valued. They think I'm too cheap for their mid-range French Riviera vacation, I had told my financial advisor while explaining the situation. I'm thinking about booking something that will make their luxury trip look like a budget getaway by comparison. What does real luxury look like in the French Riviera? For someone with your income, you could easily book private jet travel, stay in the presidential suite at one of the grand hotels, hire a private yacht for the week, and arrange exclusive experiences that your family couldn't access, even if they wanted to spend that much. My advisor had replied with breakdown of genuinely luxurious options. If you want to demonstrate the difference between their idea of luxury and actual wealth, the French Riviera has plenty of options that would make that contrast very clear. The suggestion of private aviation, premium accommodations, and exclusive experiences had been exactly the kind of dramatic demonstration I needed to show my family that their assessment of my financial capability had been comically wrong. Book it all, I had decided while committing to spending approximately $75,000 on a week-long vacation that would create stark visual contrast between my family's economy flights and mid-range hotel versus my genuinely exclusive experience. Private jet from New York to Nice, the penthouse suite at the Hotel Negresco, a private yacht for day trips, and exclusive reservations at restaurants where they have month-long waiting lists. I want everything they're doing, but at a level they didn't even know existed. The comprehensive booking of genuinely luxurious travel arrangements had been both expensive and strategically perfect for demonstrating that my modest daily lifestyle reflected choice rather than limitation, and that when I decided to spend money on travel I valued, my resources far exceeded anything my family could access. "This will be the most expensive vacation you've ever taken," my advisor had observed while processing the arrangements. "Are you sure you want to spend this much just to prove a point to your family?" "This isn't just proving a point," I had replied while recognizing that the trip would also be genuinely enjoyable. "This is showing them that judging people by their daily spending habits rather than understanding their actual financial situation leads to embarrassing mistakes. Plus, I've never taken a truly luxurious vacation, so this will be a nice experience regardless of the family drama." But while I was booking private jets and penthouse suites, my family was finalizing their own travel arrangements, apparently believing they would be experiencing sophisticated European luxury, while I stayed home being too cheap to appreciate their high-end vacation. "We booked our flights and hotel," Kristen had posted in the family group text thread. "Economy premium seats and a beautiful 4-star hotel with Mediterranean views. This is going to be such a glamorous experience. So glad everyone who could afford it is coming along." The pointed reference to "everyone who could afford it" had been obvious dig at my exclusion, suggesting that my absence would be due to financial inability, rather than their deliberate decision to exclude me based on their assessment that I was too cheap for their sophisticated plans. "Can't wait for this trip," Linda had added to the group text. "It's going to be wonderful to experience luxury as a family without any negative energy about spending." The reference to avoiding negative energy about spending had been another pointed comment about my supposed cheapness, treating my exclusion as if it were protecting the group from someone who would have ruined their experience, rather than recognizing they were excluding someone who could have dramatically upgraded everyone's accommodations if they had understood my actual financial situation. But in exactly 3 weeks, when we all arrived at the same destination on the same day, my family would discover that the person they had called too cheap to appreciate luxury was actually arriving in style that made their economy flights and mid-range hotel look embarrassingly modest by comparison. The execution of my response to being called too cheap for my family's vacation began on the morning of our respective departures to the French Riviera, when I boarded a privately chartered Gulfstream G650 at Teterboro Airport, while my family was presumably checking in for their economy premium seats at JFK Terminal. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Wright," the flight crew had greeted me as I entered the private jet cabin. "We're fueled and ready for your flight to Nice. The flight time will be approximately 7.5 hours, and we'll have you on the ground well before your family's commercial flight arrives this evening." The private aviation experience that included luxury cabin, gourmet catering, and direct flight without connections or delays had been both personally enjoyable and strategically perfect for creating stark contrast between my travel and my family's commercial flight experience. "This is worth every penny," I had thought while settling into the leather seat and accepting champagne from the flight attendant. 6 years of building my business, 8 years of modest living and strategic saving, all so I could have moments like this when I choose to experience genuine luxury rather than being limited by financial constraints. But the most satisfying part of the private jet experience wasn't the comfort or service. It was the photo opportunity it created for documenting my arrival in the French Riviera before posting carefully crafted social media content that would reveal my presence in the same destination where my family believed I was too cheap to appreciate their luxury vacation. "Perfect shot," I had confirmed while reviewing the photo showing me boarding the private jet, with the aircraft's registration number visible and the professional crew in the background, creating obvious contrast with commercial aviation. "This is exactly the kind of image that will make my family realize they made some very wrong assumptions about my financial situation." The photo that would trigger my family's reckoning with their misjudgment had been uploaded to social media exactly 3 hours into my flight, timed perfectly so it would appear while my family was mid-flight on their commercial service, unable to immediately respond but definitely able to see the post during any in-flight Wi-Fi access. "Heading somewhere special," I had written as the caption beneath the private jet photo, deliberately cryptic about my actual destination, while the aircraft registration and flight tracking would make it obvious to anyone who looked closely that I was traveling to Nice, France, exactly where my family believed I was too cheap to visit. The minimalist caption that didn't explicitly mention my destination or explain why I was on a private jet had been strategically perfect for creating mystery and questions that would force my family to investigate, rather than providing them with easy information they could dismiss or rationalize away. Within minutes of posting, the social media engagement had begun as friends and professional contacts commented on the unexpected sight of me traveling via private aviation, when my usual lifestyle suggested someone who would always fly commercial to save money. "Wait, is that a private jet?" Colleagues had commented immediately. "Isabel, I didn't know you traveled like this. What's the occasion?" The surprise from people who knew my modest daily lifestyle had been creating exactly the kind of attention and questions I wanted, forcing conversation about my resources that would eventually reach my family and reveal the gap between their assumptions and my actual financial capability. But the truly devastating impact wouldn't begin until my family landed in Nice hours later, exhausted from commercial flight and customs process, and checked their phones to discover that I was already in the same city they had deliberately excluded me from, and that I had arrived in style that made their luxury vacation look decidedly ordinary by comparison. The impact of my social media post revealing my presence in the French Riviera began exactly 7 hours after my photo went live, when my family landed at Nice Airport after their long commercial flight and finally had reliable internet access to check social media and discover that the person they had called too cheap for their vacation was not only in the same destination, but had arrived via private jet. "Isabel is in Nice?" Kristen had immediately posted in the family group text, her message mixing confusion with obvious concern about implications. "She just posted a photo boarding a private jet. Why would she fly commercial to Nice when she told us she wasn't coming on this trip?" The assumption that I had flown commercial, despite clear evidence of private aviation, had revealed how difficult it was for Kristen to process the reality of what the photo actually showed, since accepting that I had chartered private jet would require completely reconsidering all assumptions about my financial situation. "That can't be a real private jet," Gregory had replied in the group text. "It must be some kind of tour or experience where you pay to take photos in a private jet for social media. Isabel doesn't have private jet money. She drives an 8-year-old sedan." The rationalization that my private jet must be fake because it didn't fit their understanding of my finances had been both predictable and revealing about how thoroughly my family had invested in narrative where I was the struggling sister who needed to live modestly because of limited means. "Those jets do exist for photo shoots," Linda had agreed with Gregory's theory. "Rich people rent them out for Instagram pictures. But why would Isabel post something like that if she's not actually traveling? And why would she mention going somewhere special if she's just doing a photo experience?" The questions about my motivations had been creating cognitive dissonance as my family tried to maintain their assumptions about my limited finances, while reconciling them with evidence that didn't fit those assumptions. "I'm looking at the photo more closely," Kristen had posted after examining the image details. "The aircraft registration number is N725MC. I just tracked that flight on FlightAware. It left Teterboro this morning and landed in Nice 3 hours ago. Isabel actually chartered a private jet to the French Riviera. She's really here." The discovery that my private jet was real and had actually flown to Nice had been the first crack in my family's understanding of my financial situation, forcing them to confront that I had resources they hadn't imagined despite years of observing my modest lifestyle. "Why would Isabel come to Nice on a private jet after we excluded her from our trip because she's too budget conscious?" Linda had asked in the group text, articulating the central paradox. "This doesn't make sense. Private jets cost tens of thousands of dollars. Where would she get that kind of money from her small website business? Maybe she's here for work?" Gregory had suggested, while trying to find explanation that didn't require completely reconsidering my financial status. "Maybe a client is paying for her travel as part of a consulting project. That would explain the private jet without meaning she's actually wealthy." But my family's attempts to rationalize the situation would become impossible to maintain within the next hour. When I posted a second photo showing my accommodations at the Hotel Negresco, the most prestigious and expensive hotel in Nice, where my penthouse suite with private terrace and Mediterranean views would make their mid-range hotel room look embarrassingly modest. Settled in, I had posted beneath a photo showing the expansive terrace of my penthouse suite overlooking the Promenade des Anglais, with the deep blue Mediterranean stretching to the horizon and the distinctive architecture of the Hotel Negresco visible in the frame composition that made the luxury unmistakable. The second post that revealed not just my presence in Nice but my accommodation in the city's most exclusive hotel had been the moment when my family's rationalizations about work travel or photo opportunities would completely collapse, forcing them to confront reality that I had chosen to take a genuinely luxurious vacation to the same destination they had excluded me from, because they believed I was too cheap to appreciate their mid-range experience. "She's staying at the Negresco," Kristen had apparently researched after seeing my post. "I just looked up rooms there. The cheapest option is $800 per night. Penthouse suites are over $5,000 per night. Combined with the private jet, Isabel just spent more on travel to Nice than our entire family is spending on this whole vacation." The mathematical calculation of my travel expenses compared to their total trip budget had been the moment of reckoning, when my family began to understand that calling me too cheap had been based on completely wrong assessment of my financial capability. "How does Isabel have this kind of money?" Linda had asked in the family text thread. "Private jets and penthouse suites aren't website business income. What aren't we understanding about her financial situation?" The question that should have been asked years earlier had finally been articulated, though the answer would require my family to completely reconsider decades of assumptions about my supposedly struggling small business and my modest lifestyle that they had interpreted as evidence of financial limitation rather than strategic choice. "I'm going to call her," Kristen had announced in the group text. "We need to understand what's happening and why she's here after we specifically said this trip wasn't appropriate for her budget." But I had been expecting their calls and had no intention of answering, preferring to let my continued documentation of genuinely luxurious experiences speak for itself, while my family processed the growing evidence that they had catastrophically misjudged my financial situation. Over the next 3 days, while my family experienced their planned luxury vacation, I systematically posted carefully curated photos documenting experiences that made their trip look ordinary by comparison. Dining at Louis XV Alain Ducasse, where the waiting list was normally months long, boarding a private yacht for day trips to Monaco and Cannes, accessing exclusive beach clubs that charged premium membership fees, and generally living a level of luxury that even wealthy tourists couldn't easily access without significant resources and advanced planning. "Isabel just posted from Monaco," Kristen had updated the family text on day 3. "She's on a private yacht. I've counted her posts. She's documented at least $100,000 worth of expenses since arriving in Nice. This isn't normal vacation spending. She's showing off wealth that doesn't match anything we know about her income or lifestyle. Maybe she went into debt to prove a point," Gregory had suggested while still searching for explanations. "Maybe she's using credit cards to fund this trip because she was upset about being excluded. That would be financially irresponsible, but it would explain how she's affording everything." The theory that I had somehow borrowed money to fund my vacation had been the last attempt to avoid accepting reality that my income substantially exceeded theirs. But that rationalization would finally collapse when Kristen apparently decided to investigate my business more thoroughly and discovered the truth about my digital marketing empire. "I just found Isabel's business profile," Kristen had posted in the family group text on day 4. "She doesn't run a small website business. She owns multiple digital marketing agencies with major corporate clients. Her LinkedIn profile shows she's managing multi-million-dollar campaigns. I found client testimonials talking about her generating hundreds of thousands in sales for their businesses. She's not struggling. She's actually successful." The discovery of my actual business operations had apparently triggered deeper investigation into my financial situation, as my family finally did the research they should have done years earlier, instead of assuming my modest lifestyle reflected limited means. "I found an interview she did with a business podcast," Gregory had added to the group text. "She said her agencies generate over $100,000 monthly in revenue. She's been earning more than $1 million per year while we thought she was barely getting by with her internet work. How did we not know this? The question of how they hadn't known had an obvious answer. They had never asked, never investigated, and had instead relied on assumptions based on my modest lifestyle, without considering that someone might choose to live simply despite having substantial income. "We need to talk to her," Linda had posted in the family text. "We owe her an apology. We called her cheap and excluded her from this trip because we thought she couldn't afford it, but she actually earns more than all of us combined. This is beyond embarrassing." But by this point, my family's attempts to reach me were becoming increasingly desperate, as they processed not just that they had misjudged my finances, but that they had done so in a way that revealed their own superficial values and materialistic measurement of worth. If you're reading this, and you've been judged by family members who measured your success through material displays rather than understanding your actual financial situation, please know that sometimes the best response is simply demonstrating that you have more resources than they imagined, and that your modest lifestyle reflected wisdom rather than limitation. People who call you cheap and exclude you from trips based on assumptions about your finances deserve to learn that true wealth doesn't need to be flaunted, and that driving old cars and avoiding designer labels can coexist with financial resources that far exceed those of people who measure success through consumption. Thank you for joining me on this journey from misjudgment through dramatic revelation, to family members learning that their materialistic values led them to completely misunderstand who had actually achieved financial success. See you in our next story here at Her Sweet Revenge.